Guys, this is my very first time trying this out. We're going to do an audio recording as well as a video recording two in one. So I'm going to put the audio recorder right on the table right here. And so we're going to start this lesson for the year 7. We're looking at the power of the church versus the power of the monarch. So let's go straight into it. Now in this slide you can see that the power of the church, you have social influence. Now there were thousands of parish priests throughout Western Europe, known as Christendom, and these priests had daily contact with people who lived in towns and villages. Now these people were influenced by the church and her teachings, basically. Now, so social influence is one of the powers the church had. Now the next would be political influence. Now many important positions in the government of the state were held by bishops and archbishops. Now the problem here lies in loyalty. The secular clergy and regular clergy and all Christians were loyal to the Pope. They are all loyal to the Pope. And when secular clergy, that is the bishops and archbishops, take up important positions in the government of the state, and therefore by nature they should be loyal to the king, tension arises when there were disputes between church and the state. So in our next slide over here, another power of the church is land and wealth. Now the church owned a lot of land throughout Western Europe back in the 12th century, and due to vast amount of land ownership, the church was very wealthy. On top of that, they also gained inheritance, where wealthy people often left their money, which is like gold, silver and precious jewels, to the church once they have died. So this gives them far more power. The church has a lot of power in the state. Now we look at the power of the monarch. Now let's look at the social influence the monarchy has over the people. Now the monarchy, or the king, provides land for the people in return for loyalty and work the land, basically. So people will have to work on the land and provide and be loyal to the king, basically, in order to get land from the king. Now the king also had to govern the state wisely, need to make key decisions and ensure the people's safety in the state. Third point here, they need to initiate, kings will need to initiate changes that are beneficial to the people and in the running of the state. So example here, we have King Henry II introduced a new system of justice during his reign as King of England. So this is one of the powers of the monarch. They have social influence as well. They also have political influence. Here the king had to ensure good foreign relations with monarchs of neighboring kingdoms like France and with the Pope in Rome. Now they do not get involved in matters of the church. That is, they practice a non-interference policy. And under this policy, basically, they do not interfere, for example, in the appointment of archbishops. Only the Pope can appoint archbishops in states. So like in England, the Archbishop of Canterbury will be appointed by the Pope. So let's move on to another power of the monarch, which is military. Now the king basically can raise an army of knights to protect the state from foreign threats. They also need to plan and execute military campaigns to acquire more land for living space. Remember, this is very vital because basically population in England, for example, tend to grow. So it's vital to provide living space for them. And so it is vital for kings to plan and execute military campaigns in order to gain more resources, and by that we mean gaining more land. Okay, so let's look at a very interesting example where we have the power of the church versus the power of the monarch, and we see the case between King Henry II and St. Thomas Becket. Alright, so basically the king's plan on controlling the church. because remember, the church has control over the people in England. The king too has control over the people of England. So there is a tension between the two. So what did King Henry II wanted to do? He concocted a plan to control the church, and this is what he did. King Henry wanted to limit the power of the church courts. And since the Archbishop of Canterbury was the most important churchman in England, the king wanted someone whom he can trust and agree with him to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now this was very important for King Henry II, because this would allow the church and state to cooperate, to work together. Therefore, the king would have control over the church. And this is what King Henry wanted to do. That was his motive, that was his plan. And so he wanted to put this plan into motion. So the first thing he needed to do was find someone trustworthy, a trustworthy friend, basically. So he saw this person in Thomas Becket. Now Thomas Becket, before he joined the secular clergy as priest, he was King Henry's friend and also the Chancellor of England. He's something like the finance minister. Now the king trusted Thomas Becket and found that they have the same wavelength, basically. And so the king found it easy to work with Thomas Becket. And because of this, because the king found it easy to work with Thomas Becket, he tried to convince his friend Thomas Becket to join the clergy. So King Henry II decided to make Thomas Becket the Archbishop of Canterbury. Sounds easy, isn't it? Just to convince your friend, you know what, be a priest, and then, we'll make you Archbishop of Canterbury, and you just listen to whatever I say. Sounds easy, but here's where the problem lies. Thomas Becket is no pushover. He knows where he stands. Okay? Because one thing, even though he's not a priest, okay, he knew where the border lies. So we had the first problem. Thomas Becket was not a priest, but this didn't pose a problem for King Henry II, because what he needed to do was just try to convince Thomas Becket to join the clergy and then become Archbishop. However, Thomas Becket refused to join the clergy, and he refused. Now this is because he warned King Henry II that if he became a priest, he would have to put God and the rule of the Catholic Church first over the rule of the state. Now King Henry II's reaction to this was that he did not listen, he did not care. Yeah, whatever. Okay, so he did not want to listen to all this, and he just told Thomas Becket that, just do what you're told. And so, what did Thomas Becket do? He became a priest, and in 1162 he became the Archbishop of Canterbury. Hence, the king's plan was fulfilled. But then again, problem arose. Remember, Thomas Becket had warned King Henry that, if he becomes a priest and then later Archbishop of Canterbury, his loyalty would be with Rome, with the Pope. Now, remember, King Henry didn't want to listen to that, so now we have a problem. King Henry and Becket soon quarreled. Now, King Henry wanted to regulate the church in his kingdom, but was opposed by Archbishop Thomas Becket, his best friend. So in 1164, something happened. The king passed a law to punish churchmen, and this all happened in 1164. Now, the king made a law saying that churchmen who were found guilty under church courts were punishable under king's court. So this is what happens when a churchman, one of the secular clergy, were to be, for example, being found guilty of breaking any church rules, for example. They would be tried in church court.